Greetings, everyone. It is I, no, not Clint from LGR, but Reese from the award-winning YouTube channel Control Alt Reese, and of course the yet-to-be award-winning podcast Reese Rambles, which is what you're listening to right now. And this is episode 13. Now, I want to ramble at you a bit about cats very shortly, so that's something very exciting to look forward to. But I just wanted to have a bit of I just wanted to address something that I'd seen in the news recently. And I don't want to react to current news and that kind of stuff, because there are people out there who do a far better job of that. But there is something that kind of really kind of affected me personally that I just thought I'd acknowledge. So my wife is away at the moment. She's on a hen do that she has organised for her best friend off in some foreign country somewhere. And by all accounts, they're having a wonderful time. She'll be back in the next couple of days. But yeah, she's left me to fend for myself in the house. So I have to look after the cats and the ducks and the bees and the tortoise. And obviously, I guess I have to feed myself as well. But it's fine. I can cope. I've been well trained and I've managed to survive this far. And it's looking like I'm going to go the distance and I'm still going to be, everything's still going to be in one piece when she gets back, which is great, which is fantastic because I'm sure she doesn't want to have to deal with all my mess. Although speaking of mess, I think I've got some tidying up to do, but we'll keep that between us. But no, the reason this is relevant to this story is because when she's away, I find myself, and she goes away with work occasionally as well. I find myself waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, very specifically at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll cook myself my dinner and I'll sit and watch some YouTube videos, and I'll go to bed at sort of 10, half past 10, 11 o'clock maybe at the latest, and sleep for 5 hours, and then wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, as you do. And so I do what most people tend to do when they find themselves awake in the middle of the night, and I reach for my phone, of course. A terrible thing to do because of the blue light and the waking you up. And, I'd much rather be asleep than scrolling through social media. But there you go. I reached for my phone, and it happened again at 4 o'clock this morning. Picked up my phone, and I opened up Mastodon. Now, Mastodon is this new darling of I know it's not new, but of a social network. I know it's not a social network. A Twitter alternative. I know it's not a Twitter alternative. You don't need to tell me that. Basically, this utopian bastion of all that is good and right. It's left-wing Twitter is what it is. And I picked it up, and it's kind of my social platform of choice recently. I actually uninstalled the Twitter app from my phone a while back. I think I mentioned that in a previous ramble. I do still check Twitter on my PC or on my laptop occasionally. And of course, I post all my videos and stuff on there because I have a community around this channel and I don't want to neglect them. Same with Facebook as well. I don't have a personal account on Facebook anymore, but I do have a presence on there in the form of my Control Alt Reese page where I post links to my videos. So if you are on those platforms, perhaps this is an opportunity to go and follow them. Although maybe after what I'm about to say, you might not want to follow me anymore. You might hate me because of my terrible political leanings. So let's get into that. So I was scrolling through Mastodon and I saw multiple posts from people. I think they're called toots on Mastodon, but I refuse to call them that. So they're posts. I saw multiple posts from people basically calling John Carmack a Nazi, which is quite a shocking thing to wake up to at 4 o'clock in the morning, particularly as I am a huge fan of Doom, which, of course, if you're not aware, John Carmack is a legend of the game development industry. He was basically one of the founders of id Software, who made, among many other things, Commander Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, etc. And he's this legendary developer that's invented a lot of sort of revolutionary 3D rendering and sort of game-related technologies. And a bit of a hero of mine, like I say. We got our first PC back in 1994, and it had the shareware episode of Doom on it, the first 8 levels. Played it to death at the time, eventually managed to get my hands on the full version, completely legitimately, of course, like everyone else at the time, and Doom 2, and, I've played all of the Doom games, even the modern ones that he wasn't involved with. Just love that series to death, and obviously collect Doom-related stuff as well. I have quite a few of the kind of the box games and even the original mail order release as well. So to see a guy who'd kind of had this effect on my life and someone I'd always looked up to, obviously I'm a developer in my day job as well, to see that people were saying that he's now a Nazi and he's kind of aligning himself with right wing groups and stuff was like it was a real shock. Obviously, I'm not that way leaning of politics myself. I like to think that I fall sort of somewhat on the left, but I'm also fairly indifferent to all of the culture wars and stuff, and kind of a big believer that people should just get on with their lives and be who they are, and not have to deal with shit from people who've branded them as some kind of enemy just because of who they are. But anyway, that's all irrelevant. I don't let that affect my output on the channel or anything like that. But yeah, it essentially what this boils down to is there's a story on PC Gamer website, of course. Famously, it was a magazine back in the 90s as well, but now has pivoted to the online world quite successfully. A website that I do occasionally look at as well, although I'm not really into PC games in a big way at the moment. And he's also responded and addressed this on Twitter as well. And he is the headline speaker at a sci-fi and fantasy conference called BasedCon, which is coming up later in the year. And if you don't know what the term based means, by the way, it's kind of it's like a modern hip down with the kids kind of slang, which of course I am hip and down with the kids, so I'm in a very good position to explain this to you. Basically, the term based means basically if someone says something and you agree with them, you couldn't agree with them more, that they're speaking the truth 100%, then you say, oh, that's based. And that's what that means. And that term has, of course, been picked up by various political groups who claim to be, the voice of reason and the voice of truth. So they're obviously based because they are, the definitive kind of voice of truth in a world where everyone is their enemy and is trying to take them down and silence them, at least in their own head. And of course, all of this stuff it has been propagated by Twitter and social media and these ongoing culture wars between various groups, this polarizing political bullshit that's constantly going on. And the organizers of BasedCon really kind of actively push it as this right-leaning political thing. So it's a fantasy and sci-fi conference, ostensibly. And the reason John Carmack attended last year, or according to his tweets, is that basically he's into kind of very specific subgenres of sci-fi. It's not a world I really know much about, so unfortunately it's not something I can really explain in detail. But basically a few of his favourite authors were there and he wanted the opportunity to meet them, and he went along. And apparently, according to his tweets, he even spoke to the organisers and said, look, I don't think the politics is a good thing for this conference. I think maybe you need to tone that down, kind of thing. Seems the organisers didn't take that to heart at all and just doubled down on it. But they asked him to be the headline speaker this year, and apparently he agreed because, he is. And if you go to their website and look at any of their marketing and stuff, they're very heavily pushing this political ideology, and it's stuff I don't really want to go into detail here. It's stuff that it kind of makes me a bit uncomfortable, really, just because of my own political leanings. But essentially, they've got like this manifesto. They're very outspoken about being against woke propaganda. Apparently, they've got a very strong kind of anti-trans leaning. They've made it very clear that trans people won't be welcome at their conference based on their marketing. They're pro-gun lobby, pro-life, and there's even some quite blatant like white supremacist kind of language as well that the organisers of this conference are putting out, and it's quite shocking to see. And it's weird that they kind of lead with this, that it's kind of their predominant marketing push, because you would think that they're potentially alienating people, and that if you have those beliefs, why not just keep them to yourself and just sort of make people welcome and take their money? But apparently pushing that agenda is more important to them than having a popular and successful conference. I think they're under the impression that the world of sci-fi and fantasy has become worse off in recent years because of this kind of left-wing influence. It's not a genre that I'm interested in, so I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to comment on that. But there you go. I just thought that was something that I wanted to sort of mention and comment on. I'm not going to pass any judgment on it. It just seems really weird that that this kind of well-known household name in kind of my circles would want to be seen to be aligning himself with an event like this. And he has stated publicly that he's not on board with the politics of it. He's literally just there for the sci-fi and the fantasy side of things. And the people who have obviously taken issue with this are saying, well, obviously it comes across as an endorsement, and these kind of politics do have very dangerous real-life consequences for certain groups of people, which is something that I can't really disagree with. Any kind of extreme politics in either direction, is designed to kind of alienate and demonize people and turn them into the enemy for the sake of furthering your own goals. And it's not a good thing. And it's not something that I like to see someone who I kind of consider a childhood hero of mine to be involved with. But there you go. It'd be interesting to see how this one plays out. And I just wanted to mention that it's not something, I'm not going to make a habit of kind of covering this stuff, but I just wanted to mention that because it did kind of hit me quite hard when it all kind of came out, and it's kind of a very strange situation. But there you go. Of course, he's also the CTO of Oculus, part of the Meta group that own Facebook, which was quite controversial at the time as well, because obviously Facebook, all the tracking people and the kind of where a lot of this kind of culture war stuff originated from in the first place as well. One of the first sort of social media platforms to kind of perpetuate that. So hey, who knows? Obviously, I'm not really interested in his personal politics. It would be a shame if he came out and said, "Yes, I support these people." But that's up to him. It doesn't stop Doom and his other work being great. And it does kind of paint stuff in a different light. I will also say the funny thing is, on a slightly lighter note. Once I'd kind of read that story and kind of looked at everything there was to look at on Mastodon, which isn't a huge amount because I don't follow all that many people, and it's not nearly as the whole point of it is that it isn't as active at kind of showing stuff in your face that you're not interested in. So I read the posts from the few people that I follow that have posted, and that's the end of it. It's usually a very short visit. But after Mastodon, I went to Instagram, started scrolling through Instagram on my Control-Alt-Reese account, and I follow Romero Games. Now, if you know your Doom history, you'll know that John Carmack, who I was just talking about, and John Romero were the founders of id Software. Obviously, by the time they made Doom, they'd taken on a couple of other people as well to get involved. But those two are kind of the face of Doom and the face of id Software. And literally yesterday, John Romero, who has his own company called Romero Games and are based in Galway in Ireland nowadays, literally yesterday he announced his annual Pride t-shirt. So once again, he's supporting Galway Pride, and he has released Romero Games branded t-shirts with the Pride flags and stuff on in support of that particular cause. And it was just the dichotomy of those two guys who were, so central to those games that I loved as a kid, and kind of the politics of those two different posts appearing at the same time within minutes of each other was it just really amused me. I don't know if amused is the right word, but so let's move on from all that. And I did promise you at the beginning that I would tell you an amusing story about cats, and it's a bit of a random one, a bit left field. And the reason this kind of came to mind was obviously I'm on my own at the minute, and I was kind of lying in bed last night. And I got talking to Scottish Dave from the This Week in Retro podcast. Excellent podcast, which you should listen to. And I know he's a listener of Reese Rambles and a viewer of my channel and a patron of mine, in fact. And he is the one who awarded me the Dave Award for Excellence, or whatever it was called, for my channel and for Reese Rambles, which is why I can claim in every episode that this is an award-winning podcast. And the reason I got talking to him is that he has a black cat. And we have a black cat as well. And it's not the first black cat that we've owned, as you'll find out very shortly. And he has started looking at maybe getting a second cat to kind of keep his cat Johnny company. Johnny, of course, being one of the co-hosts of This Week in Retro alongside Dave, quite often appears in their videos on the podcast because they're brave enough to turn a camera on and actually do all of their bit to camera, which I don't do. And he was asking me, he was sending me links to these kittens, saying, do you think it's a good idea and everything. Of course, obtaining cats is always a good idea and always something that I wholeheartedly approve of. And it got me thinking about our history with our cats as well, and kind of the ups and downs and all of that kind of stuff. And I'll also dispense some cat homing advice as well at the end of all this. A way to kind of introduce them as well to make sure that they get on. So make sure you stay listening for that. That's a pro podcaster move right there. So my wife, Catherine, who wasn't my wife at the time, she was my girlfriend, of course. She was still living with her parents, and I think she was around 18, and she really wanted a cat. Now, her parents aren't pet people. They weren't the kind of family that had pets. Personally, we always had dogs in our household when I was growing up. I think when I first met Catherine, we actually had 2 dogs at the time. And we've always had them, and life without pets just seems a bit strange to me. But I appreciate that not everyone has pets. Not everyone's lucky enough to be in a situation where they can have pets, and a lot of people just aren't interested, and that's fair enough. And they'd never been pet people. We'd always had like dogs and hamsters and rabbits and guinea pigs and all that kind of thing. I think they had a goldfish, but anyway. She asked them for this cat, and they weren't really very keen, but they got him anyway, and ended up, of course, falling in love with him because he was wonderful, Jack, the black cat. And Jack was a real character, and when we moved house, we moved into a new build house, which we rented, and we really had to sort of negotiate with the landlady to get us to allow us to have pets, because she was quite insistent on no pets on the contract and stuff. But she said basically if the cat does any damage, then we have to. It's our job to kind of rectify that when we move out, which we agreed to because Jack was lovely. He wasn't the kind of cat that would destroy the house, so to speak. Obviously, the house was unfurnished anyway, so no worries about destroying the furniture. And yeah, of course, by the time we moved out, he hadn't done any damage, of course, because he was a lovely cat. There was an incident while we lived there. He got hit by a car. We lived quite close to a main road, although not immediately onto it. But he was the kind of cat that would go out for hours and hours on end just exploring, and we had no idea where he was. And one night, he'd gone out, which wasn't unusual at all. And we went out, and we had this dog kennel in the garden, which was like a Snoopy dog kennel that my wife, then girlfriend's brother, had built at school as like a woodwork project, I think. And somehow we ended up with it. I think because we had a garden and he didn't, and I don't know, he didn't want to get rid of it, so we kind of took it and just stuck it in our garden. And Jack was in it. He was in the kennel, which was really unusual because we had like a greenhouse thing, a pop-up greenhouse with soft sides. We didn't have a cat flap in that house because it was rented. And basically, if he wanted to come in the middle of the night, he'd have to sit and meow outside the door, which was directly below our bedroom window. So, of course, one of us would have to get up and let him in before he woke all the neighbours up. And he was very good at that. But we put a proper cat basket in this greenhouse, and he used to sleep in there. And one night we kind of looked out the door, and it was like, oh, Jack's in the Snoopy kennel. That's a bit weird, isn't it? And went out, and the weather was absolutely atrocious. It was hammering it down with rain. It was horrible, and it was quite late at night. And he emerged from this kennel, and his leg was kind of, yeah, it's quite. It's not pleasant to think about, but it was very obviously broken, one of his back legs. And we took him to the vet, and our vet said, I can amputate this, but I'm not really qualified to fix it. But I do know of vets that specialise in this kind of thing, and I can refer you to them. And we took him, and it was like £2,000 worth of surgery later, which was covered by the insurance. And if it hadn't have been covered by the insurance, then he would have lived the rest of his life as a 3-legged cat. But thankfully, it was covered by his pet insurance, and I do very strongly recommend getting pet insurance if you have pets. You never know what might happen. And you want to be there for them if they need you. And they put like a metal rod in his leg, And it was really funny because we lived next to like a big car park, which was for the kind of block of houses that we lived in. And you'd see him at night, he'd come running across the car park. And because one of his back legs didn't bend properly, his back end would kind of go sideways and he'd kind of start to kind of go around in a circle. So he couldn't run in a straight line. And it was like his bum was trying to overtake him, which was really funny. But he went on and he lived quite a long and fruitful life. And we will revisit Jack later in this tale. But Jack was a very sociable cat. There were lots of occasions when we'd come home and there would be a strange cat in the garden that belonged to one of the neighbours, various different ones over the years, and they'd just be lying there on the grass, just sunning themselves with Jack, just, sat around minding their own business like they were best friends or whatever. Really strange that he wasn't kind of territorial at all. And one day we came home and there was a kitten, a grey kitten, although in cat talk, apparently they're blue. But a grey kitten with very large paws had showed up on our lawn, incredibly cute. It had a collar on and obviously a bell and obviously belonged to someone. And we didn't think much of it at first because Jack had lots of friends. But this kitten never left. We'd go out, we'd go to bed at night and this kitten would be asleep in the cat basket in the greenhouse thing that we had that we'd put out for Jack. And then we'd wake up in the morning and it would still be in there and it'd be like, oh. And eventually we spotted that one of our neighbours just down the road had a bowl of cat food that was on their doorstep that they were always refilling. And we thought, oh, maybe the cat belongs to them. So we knocked on the door and sure enough, it was their cat, which they called Baz, which is a terrible name for a cat. Apologies to anyone who has a cat named Baz, but it is a terrible name for a cat. And we basically said, we live at number 16. We have your cat. He's best friends with our cat and kind of seems to want to live in our garden. But if you ever want him back, just, please do feel free to knock on the door. Or if we're not in, just, pop into the garden and grab him. It's really not a problem. We just wanted to let you know that he's safe and that he's with us kind of thing. And they were really appreciative and it seemed like quite nice, normal people, which made things all the more strange when they moved out. So it was a weekend. I remember it very, very kind of vividly. It was in the summer and it was nice and sunny and a nice day. And we were kind of out in the garden and we saw that there was a delivery van outside their house, a removal van. And they were loading up boxes and boxes of possessions and their furniture and stuff, as you do. And we thought, they're going to pop round any minute for the cat who was sat on in the middle of our lawn with our cat, as he often was. And I'd been, I hadn't really helped the situation because I felt sorry for this cat, and I used to feed him, and I'd come home for lunch because I worked about 2 minutes away, and feed him bits of ham out of the fridge and stuff like that because I was convinced that they weren't feeding him properly, which probably didn't help with him hanging around in our garden, to be fair. But that's just what I'm like. And eventually it got to a point where this van drove off down the road, and we kind of were a bit surprised. We're like, oh, we're expecting the neighbours to pop round. So we went round to their house just to see if there was anyone still there or anything, and kind of looked through the windows. Whole house was completely empty, no furniture, no anything. And they'd gone. And it was like, oh, surely at some point, perhaps they've gone somewhere pretty local, but surely at some point, maybe when they're settled or whatever, they're going to come back for this cat. They know where we are. We've told them. We've had this conversation with them. They seem quite happy about it. They must come back for their cat because who does that? Who moves out and just leaves their cat? But they didn't. They never came back. I remember I came home for lunch one day, and the cat we'd called Jasper by that point because obviously our cat was called Jack. So we thought Jack and Jasper, it's like they're brothers kind of thing. And I came back for lunch one day, and Jasper was in the Snoopy kennel, and I thought, oh, that's a bit strange, Like last cat to go in there was Jack when he broke his leg, and I may be getting the sequence of events slightly mixed up here, but it's still a good story. I thought, oh, it's a bit strange. Why is he in there? And I looked in there, and something just wasn't right. And I saw that there was a lot of blood, and it was like, oh, it's happened again kind of thing. And I phoned my my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, who was at work, and she worked somewhere else that was kind of 5 minutes from our house, and said, look, you got to come home. This Jasper's injured. I'm going to have to take him to the vets. He wasn't registered with a vet or anything like that. He wasn't kind of officially our pet at that point. It wasn't all that long, kind of after they'd moved out. And we took him to the vet, and obviously they checked him for a microchip. He didn't have one. They said that basically he'd broken his jaw. They said that maybe he'd jumped off something high, like somebody's shed or something, and banged his jaw on the ground. And apparently cats' jaws are made up of two bones that kind of fuse in the middle. And sometimes if they hit them, if they land funny, that can kind of split. And then the jaw has to be wired back into position and left long enough for the bones to kind of fuse back together, which is what they did. And, it's apparently it's a reasonably common thing for cats. But quite an expensive surgery. And obviously we didn't have insurance for him because he wasn't our cat. But you can't leave an animal injured like that. It's not on. So, of course, we paid for it. And because his jaw didn't work, we had to feed him liquid food through a syringe, which obviously we had to pay for. And, that was all kind of provided by the vet. And just we took the decision at the time, right, we're going to keep this cat. If these people come back for it, then we're just going to say, no, we've not seen him or whatever. We've spent quite a lot of money. We've obviously been feeding him for months. He's basically been living with us. And now we had to pay for this surgery. And we decided we'd get him microchipped, and we would get him neutered at the same time. He was kind of, an adult by that point, and didn't want him fighting and the rest of it. So we had that done. And eventually we moved house to our current house, and we moved into a village. We bought this house. We own this house rather than renting. And we brought Jack and Jasper with us, and they lived quite happily here. And then one day I was at a gig. I played in a band at the time. I played the bass, and we came back quite late, and we heard this meowing coming from the garage, and we thought, oh, we've accidentally locked one of the cats in the garage. And we opened the door, and this tiny tabby kitten came out. And it was like, oh, where's this cat come from? This isn't one of ours. And from that point, she'd never left. So there's like a manor house in our village, and there's like a couple of farmhouses as well. And the farmhouses have cats that hang around. They're not really feral cats, so to speak, but they are kind of farm cats, and they are kind of a law unto themselves. They reproduce and go about their lives as cats do. They're generally the farmers like having them around because they deal with rodents and other pests and things. And there were quite a few that hang around near one of the farmhouses near us that are tabby, that do look quite similar to this cat that had showed up. So we kind of assumed that rather than being someone's pet that had decided to move in with us like last time, that she's probably one of the farm cats, and has decided that that's not the life for her, and that she'd rather live with a normal family in a normal house. So, of course, we did the thing of trying to track down the owners and posted on Facebook and that kind of thing, and nobody came forward, and it was like, well, I guess this is our cat now. Basically, she came into heat for the first time. I think she must have been about 6 months old. And of course, all of the local male unneutered cats showed up, as they do, and did what cats do. And, of course, we didn't want kittens as well. It was like, well, do we really want 3 cats, let alone, however many? We don't want to be dealing with trying to rehome kittens, or, of course, we wouldn't have done because we're soft, and we would have ended up just keeping them all and just been, crazy cat people with hundreds of cats. So we took her to the vets and said, look, check her for a microchip. No, she's doesn't belong to anyone. Okay, can we have her microchipped, and can we officially register her with you as her vet, and also have her fixed? We called her Tiff, by the way, and the reason for that was when she first showed up, we weren't sure if she was male or female. Obviously, when all the other cats showed up and started doing their business, that was kind of when we worked out that she was female. But we called her Tiff because if she ended up being female, then of course that could be short for Tiffany. Which, of course, leads me on to my favourite joke. Whenever anyone asks me what Tiff is short for, I just say, because she's only got little legs. I know, hilarious. So, we decided to call her Tiff because if she was a girl, then it would be short for Tiffany. And if she was a boy, then we could just say that she was named after Tiff Needell, the famous racing driver / ex-Top Gear presenter. So that worked out quite nicely. But we took her to the vets, and we said, we want to get her neutered and microchipped and all the other stuff, which we did, officially registered, obviously, so we could get the pet insurance, which we had on all 3 cats at the time. And the vet said, yeah, you've done the right thing by kind of fixing her, because it seems like obviously one of the matings would have been successful. And if you hadn't done that, then she would have had kittens. And, he would have had to have tried to sort of deal with rehoming those. And there are far too many unwanted and unloved animals in the world as it is, without having to bring kittens into the world as well. So then we ended up being a 3-cat household. We had Jack the black cat, who was getting quite old by this point. We had Jasper, who was a very big boy. Anyone who came around was always like, bloody hell, that's a big cat. Big grey, fluffy, but absolutely lovely. And we had Tiff, and I think because of the matings or whatever, she kind of stopped growing. So she's always been a really tiny cat, and she's very sweet. We do love Tiff a lot. Of course, inevitably, Jack got old. He got diabetes. We had to inject him twice a day. Thankfully, that was covered by the insurance, and that kind of carried on for a few years. I think eventually they stopped paying for that, but there wasn't all that much kind of longer after that, and eventually succumbed to kidney failure, as cats do, sadly. But lived to a ripe old age with his robot leg, and then Jasper, he fair few years later. I mean, we're talking, this is kind of just over a year ago now. Jasper got bone cancer in his jaw, which we think was related to obviously the surgery that he'd had when he was much younger. He was also quite a good age as well. His jaw, incidentally, never really set straight, and his tongue would quite often stick out, and he was kind of quite well known for that. So not only did we have this big, huge chungus of a fluffy cat, but he'd sit there and stick his tongue out at you all the time as well, which was quite sweet. But yeah, he got bone cancer in his jaw, and we sadly had to say goodbye to him as well. And then we just had Tiff, and when we had the 3 cats, they were all really, really friendly, and they all kind of lived together as a big pack, and did everything together, and all slept together in a big pile on the bed and all that kind of stuff. They were really lovely, and when it was just Jasper and Tiff, obviously they were very close, and we lost him, and then Tiff was all on her own, and it did really affect her. You could tell that she was kind of a bit lost, really. So it wasn't too much longer that we decided that we would get another cat. I really wanted a dog at the time. I do still really want a dog, and I think our neighbours have a dog which we're actually walking at the moment, and she's really sweet and does live with a cat. And my wife's coming around to the idea, so maybe, you never know. I don't think either of our cats would mind a dog. I think they'd both get on quite well. They're not scaredy cats or overly aggressive or anything like that. But anyway, we went to the local rescue place, and we found this cat which they'd called Binks, which we'd decided to rename to Jimmy. Now, I said that I was going to talk about introduction of cats and rehoming advice. There's a bit of advice here for Dave, and also a bit of an insight into the rehoming process. And this is what the rescue centre actually recommended, and it actually worked out really well in the end. So what we did, they wanted to do something called scent swapping. Basically, Jimmy had been in the rescue centre for 3 months, and he was kind of in this little pod thing, and he kind of slept in this weird little nest cat bed thing that was like fully enclosed with a hole on one end, and I still have no idea how he managed to fit in there, because it's a very long cat, but he somehow managed to squeeze in. And we went to see him, and they opened up the pod, and he kind of stuck his little nose out and then came out, and it was like, oh wow, it's a very kind of sleek and very very sweet kind of cat, very, very similar to Jack, our first cat, in a lot of ways, but also very much his own cat and very much his own kind of character and stuff as well. But they wanted to do this thing called scent swapping. So they gave us his blanket that had been in his bed, and they said, okay, we'll take this to Tiff, put it in your house and see how she reacts to it. And also, if you bring back part of her bedding, we'll put it into the pod with him and see how he reacts to her scent. So we brought the blanket back and we put it on the bed. And basically the long and the short of it is we found her sleeping on his blanket, which was of course covered in his scent, which was really nice to see. And we took her blanket back, and they put it in the pod with him, and apparently he reacted really well to that as well. So they said yes, that we could have him as long as we kind of went through this introduction process. So the introduction process consisted of us basically setting up an environment for him in our spare room. Of course, he needed a litter tray and a scratching pad and food and water and all that kind of stuff, which we're more than happy to provide. We've had plenty of cats over the years. And so he lived in our spare room for a few weeks. And this process is supposed to take weeks and weeks. But I was very impatient. I think that it's fair to say that it was all me, and it was all impatience on my part, wanting him to be part of the family rather than just this weird outcast that kind of lived on his own in the spare room. So it was a really, really sweet, cuddly cat as well. We'd go in there and he'd kind of immediately come running over to us, wanting to be picked up, and we knew he was going to fit in really well because Tiff's exactly the same, and. So I started letting him out. Obviously, when I knew Tiff was either out or kind of downstairs, I'd let him out to kind of roam around upstairs, check out the bedroom, and obviously kind of get used to the smells and things. And I kind of stopped him from going down the stairs. He was very very timid, but very inquisitive. I kind of slunk around very low, kind of investigating everything very slowly and carefully every time he came out, and then he'd go back into his room, and that would be that. But on one of these occasions, and he'd been with us for a couple of weeks, on one of these occasions, I kind of checked that Tiff was downstairs, and I came up and went into the spare room with him, and did all the usual stuff. Opened the door, and he went out to have his explore of the landing, and I didn't realise that Tiff had actually come upstairs, and she was in my office / YouTube room here where I record all of my stuff. Just sort of sniffing around under the desk, and Jimmy, I think Jimmy noticed. I think he could smell that there was another cat nearby, and he kind of very gingerly came in to investigate. And of course, she was cornered under the desk, and she saw this other cat appear, which took her completely by surprise. And she hissed at him, and he ran back out into the spare room, and it was like, oh, okay, this isn't great. I thought the first introduction would go a lot better than that. And of course, my wife told me off because they shouldn't have met that soon and everything else, and I'd probably completely ruined the entire thing. As it happens, from that point onwards, I was really keen to kind of get them together to kind of know each other. So I was letting him out a lot more often, and for the first few weeks, he started to come downstairs, and Tiff would see him, and she'd kind of glare at him from the other side of the room, and evidently he wanted to be friends, and he wanted to come over and investigate and say hello to her. But he'd very, very sort of slowly and carefully creep over to her, and then he'd get to a certain distance, and she'd just hiss at him, and he'd run off. But thankfully, her being the kind of the crotchety old lady that she is, but thankfully, they are the best of friends now. They do literally everything together, and they do sleep together on the bed, and they eat next to each other and everything else. And it's really nice to see. But it was a really good strategy that the rescue place kind of came up with. It's just you're supposed to do it over a slightly longer time span, so cat smells can kind of propagate and mix, and they can become part of the pack, so to speak. But that's the story of how we got Jimmy. And as for the name, of course, we had Jack, we had Jasper. So when we got our next black cat, it had to be Jimmy to kind of fit with that theme. Not quite sure how Tiff got away with not having a J name. I think we very nearly called her Jess, but I had a hamster called Jess when I was a kid, so we kind of went off that. And the other kind of gender-neutral name that we came up with was Sam, but my parents had a dog called Sam at the time, so we decided not to call her Sam either. She is a Tiff. It suits her very well. So we decided to call this cat Jimmy, and in that bedroom I have like a little a diorama of Jimi Hendrix, which is like sat on the side in there. And so every time we went in there and we were sort of playing with Jimmy, we had Jimi Hendrix watching over us as well, which was kind of a big inspiration for the name. And that's kind of the story of our many cats over the years and how we basically stole 2 of them. So anyway, just a bit of a light-hearted fun and a bit of cat rehoming advice for Dave there. After the kind of the story at the start of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of Reese Rambles. I think I've rambled on for far too long now. Thanks for listening, and go and subscribe to Control Alt Reese, and I'll hopefully see you next week.